The wind on Ethelgard was the only thing left alive, and it did little more than move dust. It swept across plains of ochre grit and whistled through the skeletal remains of structures too alien to be called ruins. They were more like suggestions of architecture, ideas left to weather into oblivion over 100 millennia. Aboard the Echo Listener, a vessel that looked more like a floating collection of sensor dishes than a starship, Dr. Eris Thorne leaned closer to his monitor. On the eye screen, a delicate spidery waveform bloomed in hues of sapphire and emerald. It was beautiful, ephemeral, and utterly extinct. "There," Eris whispered, his voice full of the quiet reverence a historian reserves for a ghost. "That's the resonance cascade I was telling you about. It's not just a signal echo. It's a phrase. Do you see the syllabic structure?" Across the compact bridge, Lena Petrova glanced up from her own console. Her focus was less on the poetry and more on the physics. "I see a tertiary harmonic with a clean energy decay. It's a beautiful sample, Eris. The clearest one we've pulled in this quadrant. Whatever the Ethel were doing here, they were singing to the rocks, and the rocks are still humming the tune. For 6 months, this had been their life. They were the sole crew of a deep archive project, tasked with charting the bioechoes of the long-dead Ethel civilization. It was a fringe science, funded by a grant from a university that specialized in lost causes. While the rest of the galaxy built empires and navies, Eris and Lena hunted for the acoustic ghosts of a people who had vanished before humanity had even discovered fire. Their colleagues called them sentimentalists. The wider galaxy didn't even know they existed. "It's more than humming," Eris insisted, tracing the waveform with a fingertip. "This isn't random, it's language. A language of pure energy. I think it was a creation myth. A story they told to bring things into being." Lena offered a wry smile. "Well, they're not creating anything now. Let me just log the sample before its energy signature fades back into the background noise." Her fingers danced across her console, her movements precise and efficient. She was the pragmatist, the engineer who kept their lonely endeavor running. Eris was the dreamer who gave it purpose. It was a balance that worked. Their quiet, academic world was shattered by a sound wholly alien to it. A klaxon. It was a harsh, stabbing alert that blared from the universal broadcast receiver. On the main view screen, the sigil of the Vexal Directorate, AE, stylized rigid hexagon, flashed into view. The Vexal were the dominant power in this spiral arm, a species of insectoid beings ruled by unbending logic and military pragmatism. They considered pursuits like art, history, and especially xenoarchaeology to be contemptible wastes of resources. A synthesized voice, stripped of all emotion, filled the bridge. "Sector-wide emergency decree. The anomaly designated Choral Blight has breached the Orionis barrier. All containment protocols have failed. The spread is incorrigible." A star map appeared on the screen. The Viridian Reach, their current location, was a peaceful green. From the edge of the sector, a tide of angry red was advancing, consuming star systems one by one. By order of the Vexal Directorate, Purge. Protocol 7 is hereby initiated. Complete sterilization of the Viridian Reach will commence to ensure the blight does not spread to the galactic core. All sentient populations and vessels are ordered to evacuate immediately. No assistance will be rendered. The purge will commence in 72 standard hours. The message repeated, a soulless death knell for an entire sector of space. Eris stared at the map, his face pale. Sterilization? They're going to burn everything? The nascent colonies in the Helios system? The listening posts? Ethelgard? They're not asking for opinions, Eris, Lena said, her voice tight. She was already pulling up data on the Choral Blight. It was a wave of self-replicating nanites that broke down all matter, organic and inorganic, into a uniform gray dust, leaving behind a strange low-level harmonic resonance. It was the galaxy's boogeyman, a plague that moved between stars. All our work. Eris slumped into his chair. Everything we've gathered, every echo, it will all be erased, wiped clean by Vexal fire. Our work is meaningless if We're a cloud of radioactive particles, Lena countered, though her words lacked their usual conviction. She looked from the grim tactical map to the delicate sapphire waveform of the ethel echo still shimmering on Eris's screen. One was a song of creation from a dead world. The other was a scream of annihilation from a living one. In the vast silent gulf between the two, their small ship felt utterly, terrifyingly insignificant. 20 hours later, the Vigilance arrived. It was a Vexal Directorate cruiser, and it moved with the brutal efficiency its name suggested. It was a flying wedge of gunmetal gray armor, bristling with weapon emplacements. It didn't so much enter orbit as conquer it, eclipsing the faint, distant sun and casting a long shadow over the ochre plains of Ethelgard. A tight beam transmission cut through their comms, bypassing all pleasantries. "Human vessel echo listener," the synthesized voice stated. "You have violated evacuation order 44 Gamma. Explain your presence." Eris squared his shoulders and activated their own transmitter. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne of the Human Interstellar Archives. We are conducting vital research on ethel energy remnants. This site is unique. To abandon it would be an incalculable loss to galactic history." The response was a brief, crackling silence. Then, a new voice spoke. This one organic, though it carried the same clipped, precise cadence. It was deeper, raspier. "Dr. Thorne, this is Prefect Vorlag, commander of this battle group. The concept of an incalculable loss of historical data is illogical. All losses can be calculated. The loss of this planet weighs less than the potential loss of the galactic core. Your sentimentality is noted and dismissed." On their view screen, a visual link established. Prefect Vorlag was a towering figure, his chitinous exoskeleton a polished obsidian black. His head was a complex arrangement of sharp angles, and his multifaceted eyes, burning like tiny embers, betrayed a formidable intelligence. He looked at them as a man might look at a peculiar beetle, interesting for a moment before being brushed aside. "The Choral Blight consumes all matter," Vorlag continued, his mandibles clicking softly. "Your research, your ship, and your persons are composed of matter. Therefore you will be consumed. This is not a complex equation. You have 48 standard hours to depart this system, after which my fleet will begin positioning for the purge. We will not deviate our firing solutions for a single non-compliant vessel." "Prefect, if you would just look at our data," Eris began, his voice pleading. "Your data is irrelevant," Vorlag cut him off. "Vacate the system. Vorlag, out." The screen went blank. Eris slammed a fist on his console. He didn't even listen. "What did you expect, a debate?" Lena retorted, her attention elsewhere. She wasn't looking at Aris or the blank screen. She was staring intently at her sensor display, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had been running a passive scan on the advancing Choral Blight since the warning had come through. "Aris," she said slowly, her voice taking on a strange, high-tension wire quality. "Shut up for a second and look at this." She swiped the display over to the main screen. It showed two waveforms side by side. One was the sapphire-hued bioecho they had just recorded from Ethelgard. The other was a raw energy reading from the leading edge of the Choral Blight, rendered in a sickly, angry red. "Okay," Eris said, confused. "One is the Blight, one is the Ethel echo. What am I looking at?" "Don't look at the amplitude or the distortion. Look at the core frequency, the fundamental harmonic," Lena instructed, tapping a command. Her software filtered out the noise, the static, the chaotic energy of the Blight, isolating a pure, sine wave at its heart. It did the same for the Ethel echo. The two resulting waves were laid over one another. They weren't similar. They were identical. Eris's breath caught in his throat. "No, it's a coincidence. It has to be." "A coincidence to 12 decimal places?" Lena challenged, her eyes wide. "The Choral Blight isn't just leaving behind a harmonic resonance. It is a harmonic resonance. It's singing the same core note as the ghosts on this planet. It's a corrupted version, a scream instead of a song. But it's the same note, Eris." They stood in silence. the implication of Lena's discovery settling over them like a physical weight. The galaxy's greatest plague and their obscure historical research project had just collided. The Vexal saw a fire to be extinguished. But Eris and Lena, two accidental heroes standing on the edge of oblivion, were beginning to suspect it wasn't a fire at all. It was a broken machine. And they were the only ones in the universe who might just have the instruction manual. The Vexal ultimatum had been a death sentence. Eris and Lena took it as a deadline. The order to flee was forgotten, replaced by the frantic, obsessive energy of scholars who had just stumbled upon the discovery of a lifetime. Sleep became a luxury, and the ship's nutrient paste dispenser their only chef. The Echo listener became a pressure cooker of intellectual fervor. If the Blight is ethel tech, it has a purpose, Eris muttered, pacing the small confines of the bridge. It had become his mantra. The Vexal think it's a weapon, but it doesn't fit. The ethel weren't warriors, they were builders, their echoes, their language, and it's all about structure, growth, harmony. The Vexal will be here to harmonize the whole system into plasma in 47 hours, Lena reminded him, not looking up from her console. Talk faster. Her focus was absolute. She was pushing their ship's systems far beyond their intended specifications. The bioacoustic sensors, designed to gently listen for whispers across millennia, were now aimed at the roaring inferno of the Choral Blight. She was using the ship's main reactor to power a custom-built forensic filtering program, a piece of software she had designed herself. "I'm trying to get a clean signal out of the Blight's noise," she explained, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "It's like trying to record a single bee buzzing in the middle of a hurricane." She activated the program. On her screen, the Blight's chaotic, red waveform was assaulted by layers of algorithms. Filters for quantum noise, gravitational distortion, and stellar radiation were applied one by one. The signal writhed and bucked, but slowly, miraculously, a pattern began to emerge from the static. "Got it," Lena breathed. She isolated a section of the signal and looped it. A complex, repeating pattern of harmonic pulses filled the bridge. It was jarring, incomplete, and deeply unsettling. "It's a broken song," Eris said, stopping his pacing to stare at the looping signal. "It's like a corrupted piece of code stuck in an infinite loop." He brought the signal over to his own workstation, placing it alongside the pristine ethel creation myth echo they had recorded earlier. He was no longer just a historian. He was a cryptographer, a linguist, trying to understand a dead language that was actively eating a galaxy. "Okay, Lena, your part is done. You found the ghost in the machine," he said. "Now I have to figure out what it's trying to say." For hours, Eris worked. He broke the ethel signal down into its core components, which he labeled phonemes, individual pulses of resonant energy. He cross-referenced them with the tiny fragments of ethel language he had painstakingly collected from a dozen other dead worlds. He built a rudimentary lexicon, a dictionary of ghosts. His breakthrough came when he stopped thinking of it as a weapons command. "It's not an attack order," he exclaimed, shooting to his feet. "It's a tool instruction, a multi-stage process." He pointed to a sequence in the pristine ethel signal. "Look, phoneme alpha, identify matter. Phoneme beta, deconstruct matter to base components. Phoneme gamma, analyze substrate for potential. It's a clearing command, like weeding a garden." He then pointed to the corrupted, looping signal from the Blight. "The Blight is only broadcasting alpha and beta, over and over. Identify matter, deconstruct matter. Identify matter, deconstruct matter." It's weeding, but it never gets to the next step. It never gets to planting the seeds. Lena stared at him, her technical mind grasping the terrifyingly simple analogy. "So the galaxy's ultimate superweapon is a runaway lawnmower?" "Essentially," Eris nodded, a wild look in his eyes. "A lawnmower the size of a solar system. It's a piece of ethel terraforming technology that has broken down. The command file is corrupted. It's forgotten the rest of the song." The revelation was staggering. The Choral Blight wasn't malicious, it was mindless, a beautiful machine executing a broken instruction with terrifying efficiency. They weren't facing an enemy. They were facing a bug in the code, Can you fix it? Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eris looked at the fragmented library of ethel language on his screen. A puzzle with 1 billion missing pieces. He then looked at the Vexal fleet's countdown timer, which now read 38 hours. Fixing it would mean guessing the rest of a dead god's song and singing it back into a hurricane, with the Vexal fleet ready to incinerate them if they failed. I have to try, he said. I have to write the next verse. The bridge of the Echo Listener transformed from a research station into a composer's studio. The task before them was monumental: to write the final verse to a symphony of creation using an instrument they barely understood, for an audience that was actively trying to devour them. Eris worked with a feverish intensity that bordered on madness. He pinned dozens of holographic projections of ethel echo fragments around his workstation, creating a celestial tapestry of sapphire and emerald light. He muttered to himself, tracing the connections between them, testing sequences aloud. It was a process that was equal parts linguistic analysis, musical theory, and pure intuitive guesswork. The transition from gamma, analyze substrate, has to be a stabilizing chord, he reasoned, his hands weaving through the holograms. It can't go straight to creation. There needs to be a pause, a statement of intent. The Vexal are all about logic, but the ethel were artists. Their language has grace. Lena, meanwhile, had recalibrated the ship's primary sonic emitter array. It was a powerful piece of equipment, designed to send focused sonar pulses deep into planetary crusts. She was turning it into a loudspeaker. I can replicate any frequency. You give me, Eris, she said, her voice strained with concentration. But the sequence has to be perfect. The power draw will be immense. We'll get one shot before we drain the core and blow every capacitor on this ship. One shot is all we'll get anyway, Eris replied grimly, not looking away from his work. The Vexal countdown timer was a constant, oppressive presence in the corner of his eye. 26 hours. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. It was a tiny, almost undetectable echo they had logged months ago from a different system entirely. At the time, he'd dismissed it as corrupted data, a meaningless fragment. But now, in the context of the terraforming command, he saw it in a new light. It contained a complex trill, a flourish that didn't fit the destructive part of the language. It was gentle, protective. That's it, he breathed, his eyes lighting up. It's the maintain clause, the ending. He began to stitch the pieces together. He took the last known good command from the original ethel song, phoneme, gamma, analyze substrate. He then inserted a transitional sequence he had theorized, a calming harmony meant to stabilize the deconstructed matter. Finally, he appended the new fragment. The gentle trill he now believed was the instruction for reconstruct and nurture. The result was a new sequence of bioacoustic pulses. It was their countersong, a patch for the broken code. Lena, I have it, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He sent the completed file to her console. Lena's software analyzed the sequence, her expression unreadable. The energy profile is elegant, she admitted. It's structurally sound, according to your rules. But Iris, this is all theory. It's a poem. We're about to bet our lives and the lives of everyone in this sector on a poem. All language is poetry, Lena, he countered softly. Every instruction, every line of code, every law, it's just an attempt to impose beautiful, structured order on a chaotic universe. The ethel just did it more literally than most. He looked towards the view screen, where the cold, distant stars of the Viridian Reach shone. The Blight is singing a song of unmaking. We just have to teach it the chorus of creation. Lena took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the controls that would program the sonic emitters. She looked at Eris, at the mad, brilliant hope in his eyes, and her own pragmatism gave way. This was no longer a scientific problem. It was an act of faith. All right, maestro, she said, a grim smile touching her lips. Let's get this orchestra tuned. They began the final, delicate work of programming their ship to sing a song that would either save a galaxy or be their final, unheard note. With the countersong composed and loaded, Lena ran the final power simulations. The results were stark. She swiveled in her chair, her face grim. "It's no good, Eris," she stated flatly. "I can broadcast the signal, no problem. But to affect the entire Blight front at once, to override its own resonance, the signal needs to be massive. A shout, not a whisper. Our power core can't generate that kind of energy. The signal will dissipate before it even reaches the densest part of the swarm." Eris felt a cold dread wash over him, extinguishing the fire of his recent breakthrough. They had the answer, the perfect key, but the lock was 1,000 miles away and they couldn't reach it. The Vexal fleet was still out there, a silent, menacing presence. The countdown timer glowed. 9 hours. "There's only one source of that kind of power in this system," Lena said, her eyes turning toward the view screen. She didn't need to say it. The Vexal fleet. The idea was insane. To ask the executioner to loan you his axe, to ask the Vexal who had dismissed them as sentimental fools, to risk everything on their academic theory. It was impossible, but it was also their only choice. Aris sat down at his console, his hands surprisingly steady. He began to compose a new message. Not a plea this time, but a proposal. It was the most important piece of writing he would ever create. He attached a compressed data packet containing everything: Lena's waveform analysis, his own linguistic deconstruction, the full composition of their countersong, and Lena's power simulations. He kept the cover letter concise, logical, and stripped of all sentimentality, writing it in a way he hoped a Vexal could understand. It was not a request for help. It was a strategic alternative. He sent the message. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any they had yet experienced. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Prefect Vorlag read the human's message on his private console. His chief subordinates, 2 other Vexal commanders, stood by. "It is a fabrication," Commander Talak hissed, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "A desperate delay tactic from a primitive species that places emotional value on dead rocks. Their logic is unorthodox," the second commander, Jiro, conceded, "but the energy correlation data is compelling. It is a pattern we did not detect." Vorlag remained silent, his multifaceted eyes cycling through the data packet again and again. He was a master strategist, a being who saw the universe as a series of cascading probabilities. The Purge Protocol was a certainty. It was a brutal but 100% effective solution. The human proposal, by contrast, was a statistical nightmare, a wild variable based on an unprovable interpretation of sonic ghosts. Yet, it was elegant. The human theory answered questions the Vexal had never even thought to ask. Why the harmonic residue? Why the uniform pattern of destruction? The human explanation that the Blight was a broken tool fit the observed facts more neatly than the mindless plague theory. To a being like Vorlag, who valued efficient, elegant solutions, the human proposal had a deep intellectual appeal. "They are asking us to risk the integrity of the core worlds on a song, Prefect," Talak pressed. "It is madness." Vorlag's gaze fell upon the countdown. 1 hour. His orders were clear. His duty was simple. And yet, for the first time in his long career, he felt the cold, rigid certainty of his logic being challenged by something else. It was not sentiment. It was possibility, a better outcome, a solution that created rather than destroyed. It was an inefficient, illogical, profoundly human idea. He made his decision. His voice, when it came over the comms to the echo listener, was as crisp and formal as ever, yet it carried a new weight. "Human vessel echo listener," Vorlag stated, his image appearing on their screen. Eris and Lena held their breath. "Your strategic alternative has been considered. It is highly improbable. The risk is extreme." He paused. For a Vexal, the pause was an eternity. "We will be your amplifier," the relief that flooded the echo listener's bridge was so potent it was almost a physical force. Eris gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white, while Lena let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Acknowledged vigilance," Lena managed to reply, her voice betraying a slight tremor. We will require a direct power conduit link. We're sending you the specifications now." What followed was a spectacle of military precision that left them breathless. On the view screen, the Vexal fleet, a dozen wedges of obsidian armor began to move. They didn't break formation in chaos. They executed a series of complex interlocking maneuvers, like the tumblers of a vast cosmic lock falling into place. They formed a semicircle, a massive satellite dish of warships with the tiny echo listener at its focal point. Energy conduits, thick as starship corridors, snaked out from the Vexal cruisers, locking onto the echo listener's engineering hardpoints with magnetic clamps. On Lena's console, the power readings went insane. The ship's core, which had been straining at its limits, was now a tiny fraction of the energy flooding their systems. The entire vessel hummed with borrowed power, the lights brightening to an almost painful intensity. They were no longer a rowboat in a storm. They were the tip of a lightning rod. "Power transfer complete," came Vorlag's voice. "The fleet's weapon systems are stood down. We have diverted all non-essential power to your vessel. You are in command of the broadcast, Dr. Thorne." The countdown timer for the purge protocol now read 2 minutes. The same timer was now their broadcast window. "He called me doctor," Eris whispered to Lena, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Don't let it go to your head," she shot back, her hands flying over her controls. "All systems green. Emitter array is charged to 1000% of its rated capacity. On your mark, conductor." Eris took his place, his eyes on the waveform of his countersong. This was it. The culmination of his life's work, of Lena's technical genius, of a dead species' legacy. He looked at the vast, silent tide of the Choral Blight on the long-range sensors, a wave of pure entropy poised to swallow them all. He took a deep breath. "Hit it." Lena's fingers slammed down on the activation panel. There was no sound on the bridge, but they felt it, a vibration that went bone deep, from the sonic emitter array of the echo listener, amplified by the combined power of a Vexal battle fleet. A wave of pure, structured energy surged out into the void. It was their song, their plea, their command, traveling at the speed of light, toward the oncoming chaos. The bridge of the Vigilance was silent. Every Vexal on board watched their sensors. The human signal, a vibrant, complex spear of blue light on the tactical display, shot across the dark and slammed into the angry red wall of the Choral Blight. For a second, nothing happened. The Blight continued its inexorable advance. "Commander," Talak made a low guttural sound of derision. Then the red wall wavered. The chaotic, screeching harmony of the Blight faltered. Its leading edge seemed to shudder, to recoil, as if in confusion. The singular, looping note of destruction was met by a richer, more complex harmony. The scream was being answered by a song. On the bridge of the echo listener, Eris and Lena watched, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had thrown their message in a bottle into a sea of fire. Now, they could only wait and see if it was red. The silence stretched, tight and fragile, holding the fate of 1 billion souls in its grasp. The shudder of the Choral Blight was not the prelude to its collapse, but to its transformation. The angry red on the Vexal tactical display did not vanish. It softened, bled into a rich violet, then swirled with threads of emerald and sapphire. The chaotic, consuming advance halted completely. The discordant screech that had flooded the energy sensors resolved into a clear, complex, and unbelievably beautiful chord. On the worlds that had been consumed, the ones written off as dead losses, a miracle was occurring. The gray uniform dust, now fully infused with the completed ethel instructions, began to move. It swirled into intricate geometric patterns, coalescing into structures that defied known biology. Crystalline trees with fibrous light for leaves sprouted from the barren ground, pulsing with the soft rhythm of the new harmony. Rivers of liquid energy, no longer destructive, began to flow across the dead landscapes, carving paths for alien flora to follow. At an accelerated, impossible rate, the dead worlds were blooming. The Viridian Reach was not just saved, it was being reborn. Aboard the echo listener, Lena stared at her sensor readings. her face a mask of pure astonishment. The nanites, they're stable. They're following the new instructions, they're building gardens. Eris watched the live visual feed from a long-range probe, his eyes wet with tears. The landscape of a planet that had been scoured to bedrock an hour ago was now a breathtaking forest of living crystal and light, a perfect realization of the Ethel's artistry. They had not just stopped a plague. They had midwifed a renaissance. Date, comm system crackled, and Prefect Vorlag's voice filled the bridge. It had lost its rigid, clipped edge. It was quiet, filled with something Eris could only identify as awe. Dr. Thorne, Miss Petrova, he began, foregoing all protocol. Report. The Choral Blight has been retuned, Prefect, Eris replied, his own voice thick with emotion. It's completing its primary function. It's a terraforming engine, the most advanced one I've ever conceived of. A long silence followed from the Vexal cruiser. When Vorlag spoke again, his voice was formal once more, but the underlying tone had changed forever. The Directorate will be pleased. The purge protocol is cancelled. The Viridian Reach is now under quarantine, not for containment, but for observation. He paused. My official report will credit the human archival team with providing the strategic key. Your work is no longer considered a frivolity. In the weeks that followed, the Viridian Reach became the wonder of the galaxy. The Echo Gardens, as they were quickly named, were a testament to a power beyond simple destruction or creation. They were a symphony of both. Prefect Vorlag's report caused a seismic shift in Vexal policy. A new division was created within the Directorate, the Department of Creative and Unconventional Threat Analysis. Its first act was to offer the Human Interstellar Archives a grant of unprecedented size, along with a formal request for Dr. Eris Thorne and Lena Petrova to lead a new joint initiative to study, and perhaps even learn to work with, the Ethel's legacy. But on the bridge of the Echo Listener, drifting safely in the midst of the blooming, impossible gardens they had helped create, the two accidental heroes were not thinking of galactic policy. Lena had recalibrated a sensor to capture the pure, stable harmony of a nearby planet. The music of the Echo Gardens filled the bridge, calm and beautiful. You know, Lena said, leaning back in her chair with a sigh of contentment. For a runaway lawnmower, it certainly learned how to plant a nice flower bed. Eris smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. He looked at the vibrant, living worlds around them, born from a dead language and a spark of human curiosity. They hadn't been soldiers or admirals. They hadn't won a war. They had simply listened to a song that had been broken and had the audacity to teach it how to end. They were not conquerors, they were gardeners,